Welcome to The Explainer. So, think about global influence for just a second. Historically, we've always measured a nation's power by the size of its military, right? Or maybe just sheer weight of its economy. But the 21st century world order is shifting, and it's shifting fast. Today, modern global influence is no longer just about military might. It's really about who holds the keys to solving our most pressing shared challenges.
So how exactly does a nation build true global influence today? Well, instead of focusing purely on traditional hard power, we're seeing the rise of a totally different strategy. Think about exporting tangible solutions to massive global crises, things like navigating pandemics, combating climate change, and bridging the huge digital divide. Today, we're going to look at how India is attempting to do exactly this, positioning itself as a leader for the global south by offering these ready-to-use blueprints for development.
Okay, let's dive into this. First, we'll be defining modern soft power. Then, we'll explore three distinct blueprints for the global south: health through vaccine diplomacy, climate via ambitious green targets, and tech through digital public infrastructure. Finally, we'll wrap up by looking at what this all means for the leadership of the global south.
All right, part one, defining modern soft power, beyond military and economic might.
You know, the post-pandemic world really forced us to rethink international relations, focusing much more on deep, developmental partnerships. And these three pillars basically form India's new strategy. By focusing on health, climate, and tech, India is essentially offering a shortcut for other developing nations. Rather than painstakingly going through the exact same traditional hurdle-filled phases that older industrialized nations had to endure, the global south can potentially leapfrog those obstacles by adopting these established frameworks.
Let's move to our first pillar, part two, health, the vaccine diplomacy, from powerhouse to crisis.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer scale. India has a long history as a development partner, but the pandemic offered this unique moment to really step up. Get this, 62%. That is the share of global vaccine production India accounts for. It is literally a global vaccine manufacturing powerhouse. When COVID hit, India recognized a major opportunity to provide indigenous, cost-effective, and easily transportable vaccines to the rest of the world.
And this brings us to a pretty stark contrast in global strategies. On one side, we saw what a lot of experts called vaccine nationalism, or even vaccine apartheid. This was wealthier global north countries negotiating these massive advance agreements, effectively hoarding supplies, and pricing out low-income nations entirely. But on the flip side was India's Vaccine Maitri, which translates to vaccine friendship. This policy prioritized exporting affordable vaccines, like Covishield and Covaxin, directly to developing countries who simply couldn't afford the premium options from pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer or Moderna.
So let's look at the timeline, because it's absolutely crucial to understanding how this played out. Vaccine Maitri launched in January 2021, focusing first on immediate neighbors. By March 2021, it was looking like a massive success. We're talking over 66 million doses exported to 95 different sources, including UN peacekeepers and the WHO's COVAX program. But reality hit hard in April 2021. A devastating second wave of COVID-19 struck India, leading to an infrastructure collapse and severe domestic shortages. This forced an immediate halt to all exports. It drew intense domestic criticism and raised some very valid, tough questions about prioritizing foreign policy over national health security. But here's where we see the really nuanced, long-term reality of geopolitics. Diplomacy actually goes both ways. Despite that sudden halt in vaccine exports, neighboring countries that had benefited early on, like Bhutan and Bangladesh, they actually reciprocated during India's domestic crisis by sending emergency medical aid, things like remdesivir and oxygen. It just goes to show that even when short-term initiatives face catastrophic hurdles, these long-established bilateral relations and developmental partnerships can leave a lasting diplomatic legacy.
All right, moving on to part three, climate, ambitious green targets, balancing economy and ecology.
To balance high GDP growth with ambitious ecology targets, India's cabinet recently approved its new nationally determined contribution, aiming for net zero by 2070. The motif here is incredible scale and speed. India hit a 52.57% non-fossil capacity. That's a goal they achieved 5 years ahead of their timeline based on government data tracking through February 2026. And building on that early win, they've pushed the ambition even further now, targeting a 60% share of non-fossil fuel-based energy by 2035.
And the story continues with emissions intensity. Between 2005 and 2020, India successfully reduced the emissions intensity of its GDP by 36%. Now they've enhanced that target, aiming for a total 47% reduction by 2035. What you really should take away from this is India's unique position here. They are maintaining a highly robust GDP growth rate while aggressively and successfully decoupling that economic growth from carbon emissions.
So the crucial point is this absolute mammoth of a target, creating an additional carbon sink of 3.5 to 4.0 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2035. And this isn't just about some top-down government policy. It's heavily supported by people-centric movements like Lifestyle for Environment, or LIFE, which aims to transform sustainable living and tree plantation into a massive, grassroots, citizen-driven movement.
Let's pivot to Part 4, Tech, Digital Public Infrastructure, also known as the India Stack.
And this brilliantly illustrates arguably India's most revolutionary impact on global governance right now. The India Stack is this deeply interconnected digital public infrastructure ecosystem. You've got foundational layers like Aadhaar for digital identity, UPI for seamless instant payments, and platforms like DigiLocker for document verification. This is a globally interoperable, open-source system serving 1.4 billion people. To put that scale into perspective, this infrastructure currently facilitates nearly half of the entire world's real-time digital payments. No way, right?
Once again, the sheer scale is just jaw-dropping. By delivering public services and transferring benefits directly into citizens' bank accounts through this digital infrastructure, the Indian government has saved approximately $41 billion. $41 billion! Simply by eliminating leakages and inefficiencies in the old system. Now you might be wondering, why is the Global South paying such close attention to this specific tech? Well, it really comes down to the deployment model. Traditional custom builds are expensive, highly complex setups, the kind often preferred by Western tech monopolies. India, however, is offering DPI as a package solution, or DaaS. It's essentially DPI in a box, a ready-to-use, affordable solution that drastically lowers deployment time and customer acquisition costs, which really empowers low- and middle-income nations to digitize without going broke in the process.
And you know what? It's already working. Over 20 countries have adopted platforms like Mossip, an open-source identity platform providing digital identities to 110 million individuals globally. India heavily leveraged its 2023 G20 presidency to push this inclusive model, even pledging $25 million to a social impact fund specifically to accelerate DPI adoption across the entire Global South. Which brings us to Part 5, Leading the Global South. The future of digital and green diplomacy. Let's move to and see how this builds a unified vision. How do health, climate, and digital tech actually come together? Well, together, they build a really comprehensive roadmap for accelerating the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. By integrating these pillars, India is showcasing incredible efficiency. They have over 700 government programs utilizing DPI today. This same infrastructure enabled a seamless, cashless vaccination campaign for 2.2 billion doses during the pandemic. Crucially, they use frameworks like the Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture, or DEPA, ensuring citizens actually retain their data sovereignty. It's all perfectly aligned with the ultimate goal of leaving no one behind through massive financial and social inclusion.
Ultimately, developing nations are facing a pretty stark choice right now. On one hand, you have traditional big tech models. These are heavily data-centric, commercially driven, and frankly, they often lead to restrictive, monopolistic practices. On the other hand, you have India's model, open source, citizen-centric, and highly collaborative. The Global South is increasingly drawn to India's framework because it ensures domestic data ownership, it fosters healthy competition, and it builds long-term economic resilience.
We started this explainer by asking how a nation builds influence today. Well, through affordable healthcare, ambitious climate action, and revolutionary open-source technology, India has put forward a very compelling answer. But the question we leave you with today is this. As other developing nations eagerly adopt these blueprints, will India's unique brand of open-source diplomacy ultimately cement its status as the definitive leader of the Global South and completely reshape the 21st century world order? Thanks so much for joining this explainer, and we'll see you next time.